The lie was as dazzling as the crystal chandeliers hanging in the grand ballroom of the Astoria. On the most important night of the city's social calendar, billionaire industrialist Marcus Davin stood on stage, a proud arm around a stunning young woman. He called her his partner, his inspiration, the future. The applause was thunderous. But in a city built on secrets, the most devastating truths don't send a warning. They simply walk in. And as the ballroom doors swung open, the real Mrs. Davin entered, not with tears in her eyes, but with the city's most feared litigator by her side. The applause faltered. Champagne glasses froze midway to lips, and a story of quiet betrayal was about to become a very public execution. Isabel Davin believed their life was a masterpiece of careful construction. Their 15-year marriage was a fortress built brick by brick, with shared ambition, mutual respect, and the quiet understanding that their union was a powerful partnership. Their penthouse on Park Avenue wasn't just a home. It was a testament to their joint success. Its panoramic windows overlooking a city they had in many ways conquered together. Marcus was the face of Davin Industries, the charismatic innovator who charmed boardrooms and financial journalists. But Isabel was the architect. She was the one who had guided his raw ambition, smoothed his rough edges, and curated their social circle with the precision of a master jeweler, selecting perfect gems. She hosted the dinners that sealed the deals. She remembered the names of investors' children. She was the silent, steady hand on the tiller of their shared empire. The first crack in the fortress was almost imperceptible. A stray scent of a perfume that wasn't hers on his suit jacket, not the fleeting fragrance of a passing colleague, but something that lingered intimate and cloying. He'd laughed it off. "You know how it is at these press events, darling. Everyone wants a hug." Then came the late nights attributed to supply chain crises in Asia that required calls at 3 a.m. The phone once left carelessly on the nightstand was now perpetually screened down or in his pocket. He became defensive about his schedule, his explanations for weekend trips becoming just a little too detailed, a little too polished. Isabel was not a fool. She was a woman who could read a balance sheet and spot a discrepancy of $1 in a multi-million-dollar budget. She could certainly read the signs of a man hiding something. The pain was a cold, sharp thing in her chest. But she refused to let it consume her. Hysteria was a currency she did not trade in. Instead, she did what she always did. When faced with a problem, she gathered data. She started small. A casual mention of a restaurant he claimed to have had a business dinner at, only to see a flicker of confusion in his eyes before he recovered. "Oh, was it Tuesday? I meant Wednesday. The days are blurring together." She checked their joint credit card statements. There were charges at boutique hotels. She'd never heard of florists in neighborhoods they never frequented, and a recurring charge for a high-end spa package, a gift for his sister, he claimed, though his sister lived in London and loathed spas. The data points formed a constellation of deceit. The final confirmation came not from a statement, but from a photograph. A friend vacationing in the Caribbean sent her a breezy text, "Isn't this Marcus' small world?" Attached was a blurry photo of a man with Marcus's distinctive silver-streaked hair, his arm draped possessively around a young raven-haired woman on the beach. They were laughing their heads close together. The woman was Sienna Hayes, a junior marketing executive at Davin Industries, whom Isabel had met briefly at a company Christmas party. She was ambitious, beautiful, and 2 decades younger than Marcus. The sight of it didn't break Isabel. It galvanized her. The pain was still there, a low, humming frequency beneath her skin, but it was now overlaid with a cold, clear rage. This wasn't just an affair. This was a flagrant betrayal, a dismantling of the fortress she had helped build. Marcus wasn't just cheating on her. He was making a mockery of their entire life together. She didn't confront him. An emotional confrontation would give him the advantage, allow him to gaslight her, to twist the narrative until she was the hysterical, paranoid wife. No, this required a different kind of warfare. This required a strategist. She made a call, not to a friend, not to her mother, but to a name she had kept in her private contacts for years, a contingency plan for a disaster she had prayed would never strike. Arthur Finch, please. Arthur Finch was a legend in New York's legal circles. He was old school, a man who wore perfectly tailored three-piece suits and spoke in measured, devastatingly precise sentences. He didn't handle messy, emotional divorces. He handled dissolutions of dynasties. He was the man you called when a partnership worth billions was on the line, and you needed to walk away with not just your share, but your dignity intact. Their first meeting was in his wood-paneled office overlooking the East River. Isabel laid out her suspicions calmly and methodically, presenting the credit card statements and the photograph as if they were exhibits in a corporate takeover bid. She did not cry. Her voice did not shake. Finch listened, his steepled fingers resting on his chin, his gaze sharp and assessing. He'd seen countless betrayed spouses, but there was a steely resolve in Isabel Davin that was rare. "Infidelity is the simplest part of this Mrs. Davin," he said when she finished. "It's a symptom, not the disease. A man this reckless with his personal life is often reckless with his finances. He believes he is invincible. He believes the assets are his, not ours." He paused. "I recommend we engage a forensic accounting team. Quietly. Let's see what else he's been partnering in." Over the next 3 weeks, a ghost team guided by Finch delved into the labyrinth of Davin Industries' finances and Marcus and Isabel's joint holdings. What they began to uncover was far worse than a simple affair. Marcus wasn't just spending marital money on his mistress, he was moving it. Large sums were being siphoned from joint accounts into newly created shell corporations with opaque names like Apex Global Holdings and Viridian Solutions. He was systematically undervaluing company assets in preparation for a restructuring, a move that would shield the company's true worth during a potential divorce settlement. He was in essence trying to steal their shared future from under her nose. The centerpiece of his hubris was the upcoming St. Jude's Children's Foundation Gala. Marcus was the event chair this year. It was the pinnacle of the social season, a night where the city's elite gathered to display their wealth and philanthropy. He had been planning it for months, obsessed with every detail. Isabel now understood why. It wasn't about charity. It was to be his coronation, the night he would publicly transition from his old life to his new one. A week before the gala, Finch called Isabel. "We have it," he said, his voice grim. "The paper trail is undeniable. He's been setting up Miss Hayes in a company-funded apartment, has her on a shadow payroll, and the Apex Global account was used to purchase a significant portfolio of unregistered bonds. He's not just preparing for a divorce, Mrs. Davin. This borders on criminal fraud." A plan began to form in Isabel's mind, cold and brilliant. Marcus wanted a public stage for his new life. She would give him one. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice devoid of any tremor. "The St. Jude's Gala is on Saturday. I assume my ticket as Mrs. Davin is still valid." "Of course," he replied, confused. "But are you sure you want to?" "I am," she interrupted, "and I would like you to be my escort." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, then a slow, deep chuckle. Arthur Finch, a man not given to overt displays of emotion, sounded almost impassed. "It would be my distinct honor, Mrs. Davin. I shall have the necessary documents prepared and brought with me. A simple divorce petition seems inadequate under the circumstances. I'll bring the works." Isabel hung up the phone and walked over to her closet. She pushed past the rows of classic, elegant gowns she had always worn to compliment Marcus. At the very back, in a protective garment bag, was a dress she had bought on a whim, but never dared to wear. It was a stunning creation of crimson silk that was both breathtakingly elegant and utterly defiant. It was not the dress of a supportive wife. It was the dress of a woman coming to claim what was hers. The grand ballroom of the Astoria was a symphony of excess. The air hummed with the murmur of 1,000 conversations, punctuated by the clinking of champagne flutes and the soft strains of a string quartet. Light from a dozen crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, fractured and danced across diamond necklaces and silk lapels. This was the beating heart of New York's old and new money, a room where fortunes were burnished and reputations were made or broken. At the center of it all, like a king holding court, was Marcus Davin. He stood near the main stage, a vision of tailored success in his Tom Ford tuxedo. But it wasn't his suit that drew every eye in the room. It was the woman on his arm. Sienna Hayes was radiant, poured into a silver sequined gown that caught the light with her every breath. Her raven hair was styled in glamorous waves. Her smile was wood and confident. She clung to Marcus's arm not as a guest, but as a hostess, a partner. The whispers started immediately spreading through the crowd like a virus. "Is that Sienna Hayes from his marketing department?" A banking heiress murmured to her husband. "Where is Isabel? I heard they've been having trouble." The husband replied, his eyes narrowing. "But this is a declaration of war." "She looks barely old enough to be his daughter," sniped a society columnist, discreetly typing notes into her phone under the table. "Davin's midlife crisis is apparently being sponsored by Cartier." Marcus was oblivious, or perhaps he simply didn't care. He was high on the audacity of his own actions. For months, he had felt suffocated by Isabel's quiet competence, her unspoken judgment of his increasingly risky business ventures. He craved the uncritical adoration Sienna gave him. She didn't question his decisions. She applauded them. She didn't see him as a partner to be managed. She saw him as a titan to be worshipped. In her eyes, he was invincible, and tonight he was determined to show the world that same vision of himself. He greeted Harrison Blackwood, a grizzled, powerful investor whose firm held a 30% stake in Davin Industries. Blackwood was a man who valued stability above all else. "Marcus," Blackwood grunted, his eyes flicking to Sienna. "Good to see you. And this is Harrison." "I'd like you to meet Sienna Hayes," Marcus announced, his voice booming with pride. "Sienna is my partner, an incredible force in my life and a rising star at the company." The word partner hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. It was not my guest or my friend. It was a public replacement. Sienna beamed, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Mr. Blackwood, it's an honor. I've heard so much about you." Blackwood gave a curt nod, his expression unreadable but cool. "Mrs. Davin not joining you this evening?" He asked, his tone casual, but the question pointed. Isabel is indisposed, Marcus said with a dismissive wave of his hand. It was a weak lie, and he knew it, but he was committed now. The momentum of the night was carrying him forward. He led Sienna through the room, a conquering hero showing off his prize. He introduced her to councilmen, to philanthropists, to the very people whose foundations Isabel had so carefully cultivated for years. With each introduction, his confidence swelled. He was rewriting his own story in real time, erasing 15 years of marriage with a smile and a handshake. Sienna, for her part, played the role flawlessly. She was charming, attentive, and laughed at all his jokes. She believed this was her arrival, the moment she transitioned from a secret affair to the rightful queen. The culmination of his arrogance was the opening speech. As the event chair, it was his duty to welcome the guests and kick off the fundraiser. He strode onto the stage, Sienna watching from a front-row table he had reserved for them. The spotlight found him, and a hush fell over the ballroom. "Welcome, friends, colleagues, leaders of this great city," he began, his voice resonating with practiced charisma. "We are here tonight for a noble cause to support the miracles performed every day at St. Jude's, a cause that reminds us that our future lies in our children." He paused for effect, his eyes scanning the adoring faces. But tonight is also about another kind of future. It's about vision, about passion, about finding that spark that reignites your soul. His gaze drifted toward Sienna's table. True partnership isn't just about history. It's about a shared vision for tomorrow. It's about finding an inspiration that pushes you to be bolder, to reach higher. He raised his glass. "So I want to propose a toast, not just to the children of St. Jude's, but to new beginnings, to passion, and to the partners who inspire us to build a better future." The room erupted in applause, though some of it was hesitant, confused. The old guard, the friends of Isabel, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew Isabel Davin. They knew she was not a woman to be indisposed. Something was deeply wrong. Harrison Blackwood, sitting at his table, did not applaud. He simply watched Marcus, his expression hardening into one of deep concern. He was a man who hated instability, and Marcus Davin was currently bathing in it on a public stage. Marcus took in the applause, a triumphant smile plastered on his face. He felt powerful, untouchable. He had done it. He had presented his new life to the world, and the world had accepted it. He stepped down from the stage, his chest puffed with pride, and walked back toward Sienna, ready to accept her congratulations. It was in that precise moment of supreme self-satisfaction that the grand oak doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. They didn't open tentatively. They were pushed open with authority, revealing two figures silhouetted against the light of the outer hall. The noise in the ballroom did not stop at once. It died a slow, rolling death, starting from the tables nearest the door and spreading like a shock wave. Conversations trailed off mid-sentence. Laughter caught in throats. Champagne glasses froze in the air. The string quartet faltered, one violin squeaking into the sudden cavernous silence. Every head in the room turned toward the entrance. And there, standing in the doorway, was the woman who was supposedly indisposed. Isabel Davin did not look like a woman scorned. She looked like a queen arriving to reclaim her throne. She paused in the doorway, allowing the room to absorb the full impact of her presence. The crimson silk of her gown was a slash of defiance against the muted palette of the room's golds and creams. The dress was a masterpiece of tailoring, elegant, but with a daring cut that spoke of newfound liberation. Her hair was swept up in a severe, graceful chignon, showcasing the diamonds at her ears, the first gift Marcus had ever given her, a symbol of the beginnings he was so eager to toast. Her face was a mask of serene composure, but her eyes, dark and focused, swept across the room with an intensity that made people physically recoil. Beside her stood Arthur Finch. He was a stark, imposing figure in his dark, impeccably tailored suit. He carried a fine leather briefcase, holding it not like an accessory, but like a weapon. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his posture was ramrod straight. He was the personification of sober, expensive consequence, and his presence next to Isabel transformed her arrival from a mere social disruption into a declaration of intent. The silence in the ballroom was now absolute, thick and heavy. The only sound was the faint, distant hum of the city outside. As Isabel and Finch began to walk forward, a path cleared before them, as if by an invisible force. People didn't just move aside. They leaned away, pulling in their chairs, a collective, physical act of disassociation from the impending collision. Marcus stood frozen by the stage, his triumphant smile melting into a mask of disbelief. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. This was not the Isabel he knew. The Isabel he knew would have called him screaming. She would have made a scene in the privacy of their home. She would have dissolved into tears. She would never, ever engage in a public confrontation. This cold, regal, avenging figure was a stranger to him. His gaze flickered to Sienna. The color had drained from her face. The confident smile she had worn all night had vanished, replaced by a wild-eyed panic. Her hand, which had been resting on Marcus's arm, slipped away. She suddenly looked exactly what she was, a young woman in a borrowed gown, catastrophically out of her depth. The fantasy of the evening had just collided with a brutal reality. Isabel's walk was not a walk. It was a procession. Her heels clicked with a steady metronomic rhythm on the polished marble floor, each click an indictment. She didn't look at the whispering guests or the gawking faces. Her eyes were locked on one target, her husband. As she drew closer, the details of her transformation became more apparent. She was wearing the Davon diamonds, a legendary necklace of staggering value that was a family heirloom, reserved only for the most significant occasions. Wearing it tonight was a power play of breathtaking audacity. It was a physical reminder to everyone in the room, especially Marcus, of the legacy and the dynasty he was attempting to discard. Marcus finally found his voice, a strangled whisper. "Isabel, what are you doing here? I thought you were unwell." Isabel didn't break her stride. She and Finch continued their slow, deliberate advance until they stood directly in front of Marcus and Sienna. The four of them formed a small, silent tableau in the center of the vast room, the unwilling focus of hundreds of pairs of eyes. The air crackled with tension. This was no longer just gossip. This was a spectacle. Isabel finally stopped standing so close to Marcus that he could see the icy fire in her eyes. She looked from his stunned face to the terrified one of Sienna Hayes. She offered Sienna a small, pitying smile that was more terrifying than any expression of rage. Then she turned her gaze back to her husband. Her voice when she spoke was not loud, but it was so clear and cold that it carried through the silent ballroom as if amplified. "Unwell," Isabel said, a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow raised. "On the contrary, Marcus, I have never felt better. I've just been finalizing some new arrangements." She glanced at Arthur Finch, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The moment had arrived. The carefully constructed world of Marcus Davon, built on a foundation of lies and arrogance, was about to be publicly and systematically demolished. The ballroom held its collective breath. The confrontation had moved beyond the realm of domestic dispute. It felt like a formal duel with Isabel and Finch as the challengers. Marcus, recovering a sliver of his blustering bravado, tried to seize control. "Isabel, this is neither the time nor the place," he hissed, his voice low and furious. He gestured vaguely at the sea of onlookers. "You're making a scene." "A scene?" Isabel's laugh was a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "You were just on that stage, Marcus, toasting to new beginnings with your partner. I believe you're the one who set the stage. I'm merely playing my part." Her gaze flickered contemptuously toward Sienna, who flinched as if struck. "And you," Isabel said, her voice dropping to a tone of chilling dismissal, "are clearly out of your league." Sienna paled, looking to Marcus for defense, but he was too consumed by the disaster unfolding to offer any. He was a cornered animal, his eyes darting between his wife and his lawyer, searching for an escape that didn't exist. "Now is not the time for this," he repeated, trying to project an authority he no longer possessed. "We'll discuss this at home." "There is no at home anymore, Marcus," Isabel stated flatly, "and we won't be discussing this. Mr. Finch will be handling all our future correspondence." At this cue, Arthur Finch stepped forward. With a deliberate, unhurried motion, he placed his leather briefcase on a nearby empty table. The clicks of the latches opening sounded like gunshots in the silent room. He withdrew a single thick envelope made of heavy cream-colored vellum. It was pristinely white official and radiated an aura of immense legal gravity. "Marcus Davin," Finch said, his voice the calm, resonant baritone of a man who has delivered bad news for a living and learned to enjoy it. He held the envelope out. "On behalf of my client, Isabel Davin, I am serving you with this petition for the dissolution of your marriage." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. This was it, the point of no return. Marcus stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "You can't be serious," he stammered, looking at Isabel. 15 years. You're throwing away 15 years over a misunderstanding, Tom." "A misunderstanding?" Isabel's voice was laced with disbelief. "You call systematic deception a misunderstanding? You call her," she gestured again at Sienna, "a misunderstanding? No, Marcus. This is a clarification." Finch extended the envelope further. "Mr. Davin, I advise you to take the document." Marcus's hands remained at his sides, clenched into fists. He was trapped. To take the envelope was to admit defeat. To refuse it was to look weak and petulant. The entire social and financial elite of New York was watching him, their faces a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and schadenfreude. From his table, Harrison Blackwood watched the scene with an expression of pure fury. This public implosion was precisely the kind of instability he abhorred. A man who couldn't manage his own marriage certainly couldn't be trusted to manage a billion-dollar corporation. Seeing Marcus hesitate, Finch took another step forward, and with a finality that brooked no argument, placed the envelope squarely in the breast pocket of Marcus's tuxedo. He didn't shove it. He placed it with the cool precision of a mortician. It was a violation, an act of legal and social dominance that left Marcus looking utterly powerless. "That is a petition for divorce on the grounds of adultery," Finch continued, his voice calm and clear for all to hear. "It includes a temporary restraining order, preventing you from accessing, transferring, or liquidating any and all marital assets effective immediately. Every joint account has been frozen as of 1 hour ago. An emergency injunction was granted by Judge Miller this afternoon. The color drained from Marcus's face. Frozen. All of them. He had millions moving deals pending. This was more than an embarrassment. This was a financial garrote. "You can't do that," he sputtered. "Oh, it's already been done," Finch replied smoothly. He then turned his cool gaze to Sienna Hayes, who looked as if she was about to faint. "And Miss Hayes," Finch said, his tone turning to ice, "a word of advice. The apartment you currently reside in at the Olympic Tower is a corporate asset funded through an account now under legal scrutiny. The vehicle you are driving is registered to the Davin Marital Trust. The credit card you used this afternoon at Bergdorf's has been cancelled. I would suggest you make alternative arrangements immediately." Sienna's mouth opened and closed silently. The foundation of her new glamorous life had just been vaporized in a single paragraph. The silver gown suddenly felt like a costume for a play that had just been cancelled. But Finch wasn't finished. The divorce petition was only the opening salvo. He reached back into his briefcase. "That Mr. Davin," Arthur Finch said, pulling out a second, even thicker document, "is the civil matter. This is something more pressing." The air in the ballroom grew colder, the silence more profound. If the first envelope was a declaration of war, the second one, held aloft by Arthur Finch, felt like a notice of execution. It was bound not in a simple envelope, but in a heavy, dark blue legal binder. Marcus stared at the binder, a primal fear beginning to eclipse his anger and humiliation. This went beyond divorce. The mention of frozen accounts was a warning shot, but the presence of this second, more formidable document signaled a catastrophe of a different magnitude. "What is that?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. This, Finch announced, his voice, carrying with deliberate clarity, is a copy of a report that was delivered via courier to the office of the District Attorney for New York County and to the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission approximately 90 minutes ago. A wave of shock rippled through the onlookers. The District Attorney. The SEC. These were not terms one heard in a marital dispute. This was the language of corporate malfeasance, of criminal investigation. The drama had escalated from a juicy society scandal to a potential white-collar crime thriller. Harrison Blackwood, the major investor, leaned forward in his chair, his face a grim mask. His investment wasn't just in Davin Industries. It was in the perceived integrity of its leader. That integrity was now being shredded live on the ballroom floor. Isabel stood by a silent, powerful observer. She had known this was coming. She had reviewed the forensic accountant's report with Finch page by damning page. She had seen the web of deceit Marcus had woven, not just around her, but around their entire financial existence. Her initial pain had curdled into a resolve as hard as steel. He hadn't just betrayed her heart. He had tried to steal her legacy. Finch tapped the blue binder. "This report details a pattern of financial misconduct, Mr. Davin. It outlines the systematic siphoning of funds from marital accounts and, more significantly, from corporate coffers into unauthorized, unaudited shell corporations." Finch paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He then delivered the killing blow, naming the ghost entity they had uncovered. Specifically, into a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Apex Global Holdings, a company whose sole director, Finch's eyes bored into Marcus, is you and whose primary beneficiary appears to be a Miss Sienna Hayes. At the mention of her name in connection with a Cayman Islands shell company, Sienna let out a small, strangled gasp. Her involvement had just been upgraded from adulteress to potential co-conspirator. The dream of a life of luxury with a powerful man curdled into a nightmare of depositions and legal fees. She looked at Marcus with terror-filled eyes, but he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at Finch, his face ashen. He was exposed utterly and completely. The report details several fraudulent wire transfers. Finch continued, his tone relentless. Including a sum of $5 million transferred just last week to purchase unregistered bearer bonds, a classic instrument of money laundering. It also details the deliberate undervaluing of company assets ahead of a planned private sale of a key subsidiary, a sale from which the profits would have been diverted to Apex Global defrauding your shareholders. At the phrase defrauding your shareholders, Harrison Blackwood pushed his chair back with a loud scrape that echoed in the funereal silence. He rose to his full imposing height. His face was thunderous. The man he had entrusted with hundreds of millions of dollars was being accused with damning specificity of orchestrating a massive fraud. "Marcus!" Blackwood's voice was a low roar that cut through the tension. Every eye in the room swiveled to him. "Is this true?" Marcus couldn't speak. He was drowning. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His carefully constructed world of power and influence was collapsing around him in real time. Finch didn't give him a chance to formulate a lie. "The evidence is comprehensive, Mr. Blackwood. Wire transfer confirmations, incorporation documents from the Cayman's emails from Mr. Daven's personal server instructing his offshore agent. It's all in the report." Blackwood looked from Finch's unyielding face to Marcus's crumbling one. He didn't need any more confirmation. He had seen enough corporate implosions to recognize one in the making. He pointed a thick finger at Marcus. "You're finished, Daven. Consider my firm's confidence withdrawn. My lawyers will be in touch with the board first thing Monday morning. We're calling for an immediate independent audit and your immediate suspension as CEO." It was a public execution. In the space of 5 minutes, Marcus Daven had gone from being the chairman of the Gala to a social pariah, a soon-to-be ex-husband, and a suspended CEO facing federal investigation. The edifice of his life had not just cracked, it had been dynamited. And holding the detonator was his wife, the quiet, competent architect he had so fatally underestimated. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal. Harrison Blackwood's denouncement acted as a final definitive judgment. The quiet whispers in the room erupted into a low, excited roar. Cell phones previously held discreetly were now raised openly, recording the corporate titan's spectacular fall from grace. The story was no longer just a rumor. It was a verified, unfolding news event. Sienna Hayes, finally grasping the totality of her ruin, did the only thing she could. She turned and fled. Clutching the skirt of her now tawdry silver gown, she pushed her way through the stunned crowd, her face a mess of tears and running mascara. She didn't look back. Her fairy tale had ended, and she was running from the wreckage before she was formally named as a defendant. Marcus stood alone, a solitary, pathetic figure in the center of the room. The thick divorce petition was still visible in his tuxedo pocket, a white flag of surrender. The specter of the blue binder and the SEC investigation hung over him like a shroud. His eyes, wide with panic, scanned the room, looking for a friendly face and ally, but found only condemnation, pity, and the hungry gleam of gossip. He was utterly, publicly alone. Isabel watched him for a moment longer, her expression unreadable. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a profound, weary finality. This was the man she had loved, the man she had built a life with. Seeing him so completely broken was a grim necessity, not a victory to be savored. She had done what she had to do to protect herself and her future. She turned to Arthur Finch. "Thank you, Arthur," she said quietly. "I think your work here is done." Finch gave a small, respectful bow of his head. "The pleasure was all mine, Mrs. Davin." He closed his briefcase with 2 decisive clicks, the sound sealing Marcus's fate. But Isabel wasn't finished. This was not just about tearing Marcus down. It was about her own ascent from the ashes. She was a major benefactor of the St. Jude's Foundation, and as the wife of the event chair, she was listed on the program as a keynote speaker. It was time to deliver her speech. With a grace and poise that defied the chaos of the preceding moments, she walked towards the stage. The event organizers, who had been frozen in panicked indecision, saw her approach and instinctively parted for her. The technical crew, sensing a shift, killed the frantic background music and readjusted the spotlight following her as she ascended the few steps to the podium. She stood where her husband had stood just minutes before, toasting his own arrogance. The room fell silent once more, but this time it was a silence of rapt attention, of awe. Isabel looked out over the sea of faces, the powerful, the wealthy, the influential. She adjusted the microphone, her hands steady. "Good evening." She began, her voice calm and strong, amplified throughout the cavernous hall. "My husband was just up here speaking about new beginnings, about passion and vision, and on that, for the first time in a long time, we find ourselves in agreement." A murmur went through the crowd. "For 15 years I have been a partner," she continued, her voice resonating with quiet power. "I believed in partnership built on trust, loyalty, and mutual respect. I have learned tonight that some partnerships are not built to last, but foundations are. Legacies are." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room, meeting the eyes of friends, of business associates, of people who had known her only as Marcus Davin's elegant wife. The St. Jude's Foundation is a testament to what can be built with integrity and a true, unwavering commitment to a noble cause. It is about protecting the vulnerable and building a better future. These are values I hold dear, values that going forward will be the sole guide for all my endeavors. She leaned closer to the microphone. "Tonight I was scheduled to announce a joint donation of $1 million from the Davin family. That plan has changed." The room held its breath. Instead, Isabel declared, her voice ringing with conviction, "I am personally pledging $5 million to the St. Jude's Children's Foundation." Gasps of astonishment, and then a wave of spontaneous, thunderous applause filled the ballroom. It was a staggering sum, a power move of incredible proportions. She wasn't just divorcing her husband. She was financially eclipsing him on the grandest stage possible. "Furthermore," she called out, as the applause began to subside, "I am announcing the formation of my own foundation, the Isabel D. Foundation for Ethical Enterprise and Women's Empowerment. Its first mission will be to fund and mentor female entrepreneurs who lead with integrity so they never have to compromise their values or find their futures stolen by the deceit of others." The applause that followed was deafening. It was a standing ovation. Harrison Blackwood was clapping the loudest, a look of profound respect on his face. The women in the room in particular were on their feet, their faces alight with admiration. In one speech, Isabel had transformed herself from the wronged wife into a philanthropic powerhouse, a symbol of resilience and strength. She had not only won the battle, she had rewritten the entire narrative. Marcus was no longer the central character in the story. He was a footnote, a disgraced catalyst for the rise of Isabel Davin. He watched from below the stage, utterly defeated, as the world that was once his gave her a hero's ovation. Isabel gave a small, graceful nod, a queen acknowledging her court. She then walked off the stage, not back towards the drama, but towards a side exit where her driver was waiting. She did not look back at her husband. She was already focused on her new beginning, leaving him to be consumed by the ruins of the life he had so carelessly destroyed. The dawn that followed the St. Jude's Gala broke over New York City, with a cold, impartial light illuminating two vastly different realities. For Marcus Davin, it was a dawn of damnation. He awoke not in his palatial Park Avenue penthouse, but in a sterile, anonymous suite at the Four Seasons, a place he had fled to in a blind panic. The first thing he noticed was the silence, a stark contrast to the usual morning hum of his life. No housekeeper bringing coffee, no Isabel moving gracefully through the rooms. Then he saw his phone on the nightstand. It showed 97 missed calls, over 200 unread messages. A digital avalanche of panic condemnation and morbid curiosity. He switched on the television, and his own haggard, humiliated face stared back at him from every major news channel. The footage of Isabel's arrival of Finch, serving the papers of his public denunciation by Harrison Blackwood, was playing on a loop. Pundits were not just dissecting a divorce, they were performing a corporate autopsy with him as the corpse. His own high-powered corporate lawyer, a man named Garrett Shaw, left a string of increasingly frantic voicemails, culminating in one that simply said, "Marcus, do not speak to anyone. The U.S. Attorney's Office has already reached out. This is a 5-alarm fire." For Isabel Davin, the dawn brought a profound, cleansing quiet. She woke in her own bed, the crimson gown from the night before, draped over a chair like a discarded battle standard. The vast penthouse, once a shared space, felt different, larger, filled with potential. It was hers now. She made coffee herself, the simple act feeling like a reclamation. She didn't turn on the television. She didn't need to. She had written the script. Instead, she sat by the large window overlooking the park, watching the city come to life, and began to make a list. Not of grievances, but of objectives. Her war was not over. It had simply entered a new constructive phase. The first objective was met later that day. At the headquarters of Davin Industries, in a boardroom lined with portraits of Marcus's father and grandfather, the remaining board members assembled. Harrison Blackwood presided over the meeting with the grim authority of a hanging judge. Marcus was not invited. His presence was represented by his lawyer, Garrett Shaw, who looked pale and beleaguered. "The facts are clear." Blackwood began, his voice like gravel. "Davin's actions have exposed this company to catastrophic legal and financial risk. He has embarrassed us. He has defrauded us. And he has in one night torched a reputation built over 50 years. The stock is in freefall. Our lenders are calling. This is not a discussion. This is a sanitation effort." The vote was a mere formality. Marcus Davin was stripped of his titles, his access to the building revoked, his corporate accounts frozen. He was officially an exile from the kingdom he had once ruled. Meanwhile, the ripples of the gala continued to spread, engulfing the smaller players. Sienna Hayes found her world had shrunk to the size of a friend's cramped studio apartment in Astoria, Queens. Her glamorous clothes and jewelry, bought with Marcus's money, felt like a cheap costume. Her phone buzzed not with invitations, but with threats and vile messages from strangers. Marcus had blocked her number. She was a pariah. The true terror arrived 2 days later in the form of a knock on the door. A stern-faced man in a cheap suit served her with a subpoena to testify before a grand jury regarding her knowledge of Apex Global Holdings. As she stared at the official document, the words blurring through her tears, she finally understood. She had never been his partner. She had been a high-risk disposable asset, and she had just been liquidated. While their worlds collapsed, Isabel was building. Her penthouse became a command center. Her team assembled daily. Arthur Finch managing the legal blitzkrieg. A sharp, formidable PR executive named Clara Rossi who was shaping the public narrative. And a shrewd wealth manager who was helping Isabel untangle her finances and lay the groundwork for her new foundation. "The media is framing you as the avenging angel," Clara reported in one meeting, pointing to a series of headlines. "It's powerful, but we need to pivot from revenge to renaissance. The foundation is the key. It redefines your identity from the ex-Mrs. Davin to Isabel D. founder and philanthropist." Isabel listened absorbed and directed. "The name is crucial. It needs to be forward-looking. The Isabel D. Foundation for Ethical Enterprise and Women's Empowerment." She stated the name she had conceived and announced on stage. "Our mission isn't just to give money. It's to build scaffolding for women who have the talent but lack the access to ensure their ventures are built on unshakable ethical ground." Her clarity and vision impressed them all. This was not a woman being guided by professionals. This was a CEO leading her new venture. The ultimate, most stunning validation came a week later. The call came directly to her private line. "Isabel, it's Harrison Blackwood." His voice was respectful, almost deferential. "I'm calling on behalf of the board of Davin Industries. We are in a crisis of confidence. The brand is toxic because of Marcus. The only person who has emerged from this with their reputation enhanced, in fact burnished to a high shine, is you." Isabel was silent, listening. "The company needs you," Blackwood said bluntly. "You were the strategic mind behind the early successes. You have the name, but more importantly, you have the integrity. We want to offer you a seat on the board of directors." The irony was so thick she could taste it. To sit in the seat of power her husband had just been violently ejected from. Her first instinct was to refuse to cut all ties. But then she thought of the employees of the legacy, a legacy that was as much hers as it was his. It was her strategy that had guided its early growth. It was her inheritance, too, in a way. "Harrison," she replied, her voice steady. "I will accept, on 2 conditions. First, the board must fund a complete top-to-bottom independent review of the company's ethical compliance protocols. Second, the company will become a cornerstone benefactor of my foundation." Blackwood didn't hesitate. "Done. Welcome to the board, Isabel." A month later, a letter arrived forwarded by Arthur Finch's office. It was handwritten on cheap stationery, the handwriting messy and agitated. It was from Marcus. She considered throwing it away, but a need for finality made her open it. It was not an apology. It was a rambling, self-pitying screed, blaming her for his downfall, calling her vindictive and cruel, lamenting his lost fortune. He wrote of her public ambush and how she had destroyed him for a moment of pride. Reading it, Isabel felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even pity. It was like reading a letter from a bitter stranger. The man she had loved, the partner she had built a life with, was truly gone. This pathetic, whining creature was all that remained. She folded the letter, walked to the fireplace, and dropped it into the flames, watching the bitter words turn to grey ash and disappear. That was her closure. The final word on the saga of Marcus Davin came during a final wrap-up meeting with Arthur Finch. "The plea agreement has been finalized," Finch reported, closing a file. "He'll plead guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of securities fraud. He avoids jail time, but he's paying over $200 million in fines and restitution. He is permanently barred from the securities industry. He's finished." "And Miss Hayes?" Isabel asked. "Testified against him in exchange for immunity," Finch said with a shrug. "Last I heard, she'd moved back to her parents' home in Ohio, a rather steep fall from the Olympic Tower." Finch looked at Isabel, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "You did not just win a case, Mrs. Davin. You navigated an impossible situation with a courage and strategic brilliance I have seldom witnessed. You reclaimed a life." Later that evening, Isabel stood in her new office, the headquarters of her thriving foundation. She looked out the panoramic window at the tapestry of city lights. Each light was a story, a struggle, a dream. A year ago, she had looked out at this same city and seen the boundaries of a gilded cage. Now she saw a landscape of infinite possibility. She had learned the hardest lesson, that the strongest fortresses are not built of brick and stone or shared wealth. They are built within oneself, forged from integrity, resilience, and the courage to burn down a life that is a lie, to build a new one that is the truth. She was not the woman who was betrayed. She was the woman who survived, who fought back, and who had in the end won everything that mattered. The fall of one empire is often the foundation of another. Isabel Davin's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can sometimes forge the strongest versions of ourselves. She walked into that ballroom as a wife who had been wronged, but she walked out as a leader who had taken control of her own destiny. Her journey from the ashes of a broken marriage to the helm of her own foundation shows that true power isn't about the name you carry, but the integrity you uphold. If Isabel's transformation from quiet partner to public powerhouse inspired you, please let us know in the comments. What part of her story resonated with you the most? Don't forget to like this video. If you believe in the power of justice and resilience, share it with someone who needs to hear a story of strength, and subscribe to our channel for more true life dramas, where the truth always has its day. The winter wind bit through her threadbare coat, but Sarah Donovan barely noticed. Strolling past neon-lit windows, she couldn't ignore the relentless ache in her belly, an ache caused by hunger and the 6-month child she carried. Shivering on the sidewalk, she glanced up at a massive TV screen, blaring the nightly financial news. There, beaming under the bright studio lights, was a man she once promised to love forever. William Donovan, her husband, a multimillionaire, famous, admired, while she trembled in the cold. Her heart twisted. How had their world turned so cruel? She had nothing, and he seemed to have it all. Sarah Donovan had known hunger before, but never like this. On that frigid evening, the wind seemed to slice through layers of her clothing directly into her bones. She pulled the sides of her coat together in a desperate attempt to keep warm. Through the swirling snowflakes, she could just make out the bright, flashing monitors in Times Square. On the largest screen, a familiar face, William Donovan, appeared. His name scrolled in large letters. Tech Investor of the Year. Applause thundered behind him in the recorded clip. Brightly lit, he was addressing a hall filled with wealth power and cameras from CNN, CNBC, and local networks. Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away. That face, the strong jaw, the slight smile that once reassured her everything would be all right. Now he looked polished, exuding confidence. She hadn't seen him in person for almost a year. Her chest clenched with memories of the day he walked out, arguments about money and ambition overshadowing their love. She'd tried to reason with him to support him, but each conversation ended in a new fight, culminating in the shocking decision he would succeed alone. The flickering billboard cut to a montage of images, William shaking hands with Mark Cuban at a tech conference, then introducing a pioneering piece of software in Silicon Valley. Sarah saw glimpses of glamorous parties William in a tailored tuxedo, accompanied by men and women she had never met. The talk show host concluded the segment by proclaiming, "William Donovan, America's newest business sensation." Then the screen blinked to a car commercial. Just like that, he vanished into the night. Sarah blinked back tears. There was a time William's arms had been her warm refuge, promising they'd face every storm side by side. And now, pregnant with his child, she walked alone on icy sidewalks, scrounging for a place to sleep. She was determined not to cry, but her emotions overwhelmed her as she gazed up at the ironically beautiful Christmas lights decorating the city. By all appearances, the world around her was celebrating, and she was surviving. Barely. She pressed a hand against her abdomen, feeling the slightest kick. "I'll take care of you," she whispered to the life inside her. It was a promise she intended to keep, though at that moment she wasn't sure how. When she turned away from the screen and stumbled onward, her foot snagged on a piece of broken pavement. A stinging pain shot through her ankle, and she nearly collapsed. She bit down a cry, scanning the crowd for help, but passers-by, preoccupied with their own rush of errands and holiday shopping, scarcely gave her a glance. That's what life had become after she left the small studio in which she and William once lived, alone, invisible. Sarah's pride was bruised, but she refused to crumble. She passed by a bakery. Through the window, the smell of fresh bread made her stomach twist. She had to preserve her last dollar for the cheapest motel, a place with peeling wallpaper and barely functioning plumbing, but at least it was indoors. She stepped inside, bought a small roll and devoured it in 3 bites. Outside again, the wind roared, intensifying the city's clamor. Still clutching her abdomen, she decided that tomorrow everything had to change. She would find a job. She'd scour the city for help. She would not let her child enter this world with nothing but sorrow. But for tonight, she needed a place to rest, a place that wasn't some abandoned corner or shadowed alley. Even if it cost her last few dollars, she had to prioritize the safety of the life inside her. As Sarah walked away from the mesmerizing screens of Times Square, one thought pulsed in her mind. Her husband, the man she had once loved beyond reason, was thriving. And here she was, pregnant and alone. Could the chasm between them grow any wider? Long before he was the darling of business magazines and tech summits, William Donovan was a daydreamer writing code in the corner of the local university library. Sarah remembered the first time she saw him. It was her sophomore year, and she was majoring in English literature at Columbia. The library's back table had been her favorite spot, quiet, perfect for reading. She noticed him, a junior in computer science, leaning over a laptop with an exasperated scowl. Curious and drawn by the intellectual frenzy in his eyes, she'd asked, "Need any help?" Although Sarah barely understood advanced programming, the question sparked the first real conversation they ever had. William's exhausted face broke into the shyest of smiles, and she recalled thinking, "He's kind of cute under all that stress." They chatted about his class project, an algorithm for data compression. Sarah confessed she was more comfortable discussing Shakespeare than software, and he teased her gently. From that moment on, they were a constant presence in each other's lives. Their connection seemed effortless. He awakened her interest in technology's potential. She introduced him to literary classics, weaving in metaphors about love and ambition. They started dating by Christmas break of that year, with sweet, simple moments, late-night walks around campus, scrounging for cheap coffee in the student lounge, trying out new ramen spots around Manhattan. They were two dreamers, William longing to found a tech startup that would revolutionize how people shared data, and Sarah hoping to become a novelist. The future seemed limitless. She could still feel the way he used to grasp her hand whenever she doubted herself, as if to say, "We'll get through anything." Yet as graduation approached, financial stresses haunted them. William, determined to compete in the tech world, pitched his software to small investors, but faced constant rejection. Sarah, meanwhile, struggled to get traction for her short stories, or even land a decent internship. Their families offered little financial support. William's parents, proud owners of a modest real estate business in upstate New York, expected him to follow a more traditional path and often expressed skepticism toward his entrepreneurial obsession. Sarah's mother, whose chronic illness drained the family's savings, couldn't help beyond a few encouraging phone calls. When they got married in a humble civil ceremony right after graduation, they were brimming with hope. Their honeymoon was a short weekend, spent in a budget motel near Niagara Falls, the only getaway they could afford. But they didn't care. What mattered was their shared devotion. They returned to New York City, renting a cheap studio apartment in Queens. William coded into the late hours, while Sarah worked as a barista by day and scribbled short stories by night. Their love burned like a bright flame until cracks began to form. William became consumed with success, obsessed, really. Each failed pitch to an investor sent him into a silent downward spiral that led to outbursts. Sarah tried to reassure him that failure was part of the journey, but her optimism only irritated him. As months dragged on, the bills piled up. William grew desperate, dabbling in risky deals with shady angel investors. They had endless arguments about money. When success finally arrived nearly 2 years into their marriage, with a major investor, Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank, buying into William's new software idea, Sarah hoped that would ease the tension. But ironically, it only magnified their differences. William was suddenly thrust into corporate meetings, traveling across the country, networking with high-profile entrepreneurs. Invitations to flashy events replaced their quiet dinners. He no longer came home with cheap takeout. He was gone most nights, presumably in boardrooms or at fancy parties. Sarah felt him slipping away. A year passed in that swirl of success, and Sarah was left behind, often alone, in their now upscale condo near Central Park. William's time was devoured by business calls and conferences on the West Coast. When he was home, he was distracted, fidgety, unwilling to share stories of his day. She remembered their final argument vividly. She'd asked him to spend one evening with her to reconnect. He retorted that she had no clue how hard he worked to keep them afloat, how she should be more grateful. That night ended with William storming out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. He never came back. Days became weeks. Sarah's calls and texts went unanswered. Soon bank notices arrived explaining how William had switched all joint accounts to his name alone. Sarah had no income. Worse yet, 2 months later, she discovered she was pregnant. Fear overrode any bitterness, but desperation set in. Rent soared, her barista job didn't pay enough, and she could no longer afford the condo. Before long, she was forced onto the street. She tried contacting William's PR office, but the line always went to a polite assistant who left her on hold until she hung up in frustration. Now, witnessing his face on the giant screen in Times Square, that entire whirlwind of a past threatened to engulf her. She reminded herself of one vow she'd made, standing in that battered apartment with an eviction notice in hand. I will survive and protect this child. If the father refused to care, she would find a way. She would not become just another nameless tragedy in the city's underbelly. Morning brought little relief from the cold. Sarah woke on a narrow, squeaky bed in the cheapest motel she could find. The heater rattled uselessly, barely keeping the air above freezing. She had about $15, left enough for a couple of cheap sandwiches, maybe bus fare if she wanted to head to the next shelter. But Sarah was stubborn. She believed there had to be something better. She packed her meager belongings, a change of clothes, her worn copy of Emily Dickinson's poems, a phone with a cracked screen that almost never picked up a signal. Everything fit into a single bag. Every step outside felt like walking through a wind tunnel. She knew she had to find help soon. A pregnant woman living on the streets was a tragedy waiting to happen. She headed to the nearest public library, an older building with classical columns, seeking warmth and free internet to look for job openings. Inside, near the community bulletin board, she found a flyer advertising a free women's shelter in Brooklyn. It promised hot meals counseling and prenatal support. She tore off the address tab. This might be my best chance, she thought, shoulders relaxing slightly for the first time in days. She hopped on a bus, ignoring the pitying looks from a couple of other passengers. Upon arrival, she found the shelter nestled in a quiet neighborhood. The building was large, with peeling paint and sagging steps, but the warmth she felt when she walked inside was immediate and comforting. A friendly volunteer named Rebecca greeted her with a kind smile. After scribbling her name on a form, Sarah was shown to a cramped but clean room, shared with 3 other women. Each cot had fresh blankets and a small side table. Meals are served at 7 in the morning and 6 in the evening, Rebecca explained. We also have prenatal checkups every Friday with a visiting nurse from Bellevue Hospital. Sarah nearly cried with relief. A medical checkup was a blessing. She hadn't seen a doctor since learning of her pregnancy. Rebecca chatted with her for a while, asking about her situation. Though Sarah felt hesitant to reveal too much, there was something about Rebecca's gentle nature that encouraged honesty. She admitted her husband had left, that he was well off, and that she had nowhere else to go. Rebecca listened, never judging, then simply patted Sarah's shoulder. You'll be safe here. You'll get back on your feet. I'm here if you need anything, Rebecca offered. Those words of encouragement did more for Sarah's spirit than anything had in months. That first night in the shelter, Sarah lay in the dark, hearing the muffled snores of her roommates. She felt a faint flutter within her baby moving. I'm not alone, she reminded herself. This life inside her gave her purpose. She recalled an old Emily Dickinson line. She loved something about hope being a thing with feathers. That hope had perched in her soul, refusing to abandon her even in life's darkest corners. The next morning she joined the breakfast queue. The food wasn't luxurious oatmeal, a banana-powdered orange juice, but it was warm and nourishing. Some of the residents eyed her suspiciously. They were all at different points in life's struggles, yet in their gazes, Sarah sensed a silent camaraderie that had been missing in her life for so long. As she sat down to eat, Rebecca joined her. We have a job support program, Rebecca said, her voice quiet. You'd get help writing a resume, searching for openings, maybe training. I know it can be tough to find something with no stable address, but we can try. Sarah nodded eagerly. That would be great, she replied, swallowing a surge of gratitude. She was ready to do anything office cleaning retail, anything that would help her earn enough for a deposit on a small apartment. But as she scrolled through job listings later that day, a rerun of a business show played on the shelter's TV in the lounge. They were discussing William Donovan again. A celebrity investor, Mark Cuban, had praised William's entrepreneurial drive, suggesting he was the future of American tech. Hearing the news anchor casually mention her husband's name felt like a punch to the gut. He was more successful than she'd even imagined. She took a deep breath, forced herself to look away from the screen and told herself, "This is my life now, and I'm not giving up." She wasn't sure if she hated him, missed him, or simply wished none of this had happened. All she knew was that she had to survive, and she would on her own terms. At precisely 9 in the morning the following Friday, Sarah waited in a makeshift exam room set up in the shelter's converted rec hall. Worn curtains partitioned the space. The volunteer nurse, Miss Francis, bustled in, setting down a bag of medical supplies. She was a short, no-nonsense woman with bright, reassuring eyes. "How are you feeling, dear?" Miss Francis asked, washing her hands and snapping on latex gloves. Sarah hesitated. She had been ignoring the dull ache in her lower back, the bouts of nausea that still came and went, and the constant exhaustion. "Better now that I have a safe place to sleep," she admitted. Ms. Francis nodded, taking Sarah's vitals, measuring her belly, and listening carefully with a Doppler for the baby's heartbeat. The rhythmic whoosh-whoosh filled the air, and Sarah's eyes grew misty. This was the first time she'd heard her child's heartbeat. So strong, she thought, pressing a hand to her mouth. "No major concerns right now?" Ms. Francis informed, giving a small smile. "But you need to be mindful of your diet. Get as much protein and healthy foods as you can. And rest. Stress can harm the baby too." Sarah almost laughed bitterly. Stress was the only thing she had in abundance. But she forced a bright nod. Ms. Francis noted that Sarah would need a formal medical file at a hospital soon in case of early labor or complications. "We'll coordinate that," Ms. Francis added. "In the meantime, do you have any support person for prenatal care? A family member or—" her voice trailed. "My husband's not around," Sarah said, swallowing a lump in her throat. "No other family in the city." The nurse's expression turned sympathetic. "Well, you're not alone. We're here to help." After the checkup, Sarah felt slightly more confident. The baby was healthy. That knowledge was the anchor she clung to. She spent her afternoons in the job support program, brushing up her typing skills, practicing interview responses with a counselor named Janet. Her English degree helped. She applied for positions as a receptionist, an editorial assistant, or even a part-time tutor. Most responses came back negative. Employers didn't want someone with an unstable address, or they required advanced certifications. But Sarah persevered. Days turned into weeks. The bulge in her belly became more pronounced, and so did the heaviness in her heart. She tried to keep track of the outside world, scanning newspapers in the library for job ads, occasionally glimpsing headlines about William Donovan's skyrocketing success. One day the paper featured a photograph of him leaving a high-end restaurant with a tall, elegant woman wearing designer clothes. The photo caption labeled her as Madeline Ashford, potential new business partner. Sarah's throat tightened. She glanced at her own reflection in the library window. Rumpled coat eyes ringed with fatigue. If William had moved on personally, was she even a memory? That evening her back pains grew sharper, and she realized with dread that her pregnancy was entering a stage where she would soon need consistent medical care. She couldn't keep skipping checkups or rely solely on the shelter nurse. She also worried about finances, diapers, baby clothes, a crib. Where would she get them? She'd joined a waiting list for government assistance, but bureaucracy moved at a snail's pace. Sarah found herself weeping some nights, the future an ominous shadow. Yet each morning she recalled the baby's heartbeat, reminding herself there was no choice but forward. One particularly cold day, she forced herself to walk 3 miles in the slushy streets to follow up on a potential receptionist position. She arrived soaked and shivering. Her hopes rose when the manager, a kindly older woman, offered a temporary role answering phones at a small publishing company. The pay was minimal, but it was something. She'd start Monday. Sarah left the office hugging a folder of paperwork and feeling a glimmer of pride. I'm making progress. When she returned to the shelter, though, she found Rebecca pale-faced in the hallway. We need to talk, Rebecca said quietly, leading Sarah to a corner. Apparently an acquaintance of Sarah's had come by looking for her, a man with slicked-back hair and an expensive suit. He left a business card that read, Donovan Enterprises. Sarah's heart hammered. She stared at the card, the swirling black and gold letters. Did he say anything she managed to ask? Just that he needed to speak with you regarding a personal matter. Sarah's mind whirled. Could it be William's lawyer? One of his personal aides? Did William know she was pregnant? She never thought he would actually search for her. A swirl of anger, fear, and a strange residual hope filled her. She resolved to call the number. Maybe it was finally time for a confrontation, a reckoning. She just didn't know what to expect. Sarah picked up a battered pay-as-you-go phone, a small victory from the shelter's resource program, and stared at the business card. It bore a name, Charles Whitmore, Legal Counsel. She dialed with trembling fingers, listening to the ring on the other end. Anxiety swelled. Finally, a crisp male voice answered. Charles Whitmore speaking. This is Sarah Donovan. You left your card at the shelter. Her voice sounded small. He cleared his throat. Ah, Mrs. Donovan. I'm glad you reached out. Mr. Donovan, your husband would like to set up a meeting. It's in regard to finances and certain changes to his estate. A chill ran down her spine. Was this about a divorce? She almost panicked at the thought, but she maintained composure. Why now? She asked. The question came out bitterly. Ma'am, I only have instructions to coordinate your meeting. Could you come by the Donovan Enterprises office downtown on 5th Avenue? Sarah hesitated. I can't. Not immediately. She had a job orientation. Soon she had no decent clothes and no money for a taxi. Shall we say, next Tuesday at noon, he pressed. We'd be happy to reimburse your transportation. Mr. Donovan understands how difficult the city can be. He specifically requested you meet in a neutral setting. Sarah's anger flared at the paternalistic tone. But caution prevailed. All right. Tuesday. She hung up, heart thudding. William wants to meet. Part of her raged that he would drag her into some legal affair after all this time. Another part, small yet insistent, felt relief that maybe he would acknowledge their baby. Maybe do the right thing. And at least provide child support. Tuesday came quickly, and Sarah found herself rummaging through the shelter's donated clothing closet, picking out a modest black dress and a coat that fit snugly over her belly. Rebecca offered to do her hair in a simple bun. As she left, 6 women in the shelter wished her luck, though they knew only that she was meeting her ex. The Donovan Enterprises office towered over Fifth Avenue with mirrored glass windows. Sarah approached it anxiously, ignoring the doorman's raised eyebrow when she walked in. The marble-floored lobby gleamed, and well-dressed professionals hurried past, exuding an air of wealth. A statue of William's trademark D logo was on display near the elevators, a testament to his success. Charles Whitmore, a tall, slim man with greying hair, emerged from behind the reception area and greeted her with a polite bow. "Mrs. Donovan." "Right this way," he said, leading her to a plush conference room overlooking the city skyline. Soft leather chairs, a polished mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Central Park. Everything screamed opulence. She perched on a chair, feeling out of place. Moments later, the door opened. In walked William Donovan. He wore a tailored charcoal suit and stepped forward with a hesitant smile. Sarah's throat constricted at the sight of him. He looked the same, yet different, older, more confident. She stood instinctively, placing a protective hand on her abdomen. If he noticed her rounded belly, he didn't show any immediate reaction. "Sarah," he said quietly, as though testing the word. He paused, his eyes flicking to her stomach, then back to her face. "Thank you for coming. I didn't realize you were, are you?" She inhaled sharply. "Pregnant," she finished. "Yes. For nearly 6 months." A fleeting expression of shock, maybe guilt, flashed in his eyes. "I didn't know," he said. You didn't tell me." Anger boiled in her. "I tried. You cut all contact. You walked out. And..." Her voice trembled. She clenched her fists. "You were too busy with your empire to pick up the phone." He exhaled, looking pained. "I'm sorry. I truly am." He sank into the chair opposite her, rubbing his temples. "I messed up. I realize that now. I've been going through a lot, but it's no excuse." She eyed him warily, uncertain if this was genuine remorse or a performance. "So why am I here?" "Did you need me to sign divorce papers? Is that it?" William shook his head vigorously. No. That's not it at all." He looked at Charles, who stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mr. Donovan asked me to assist in drafting an arrangement to provide you with financial support, enough to cover all prenatal care, childbirth expenses, and living costs. In addition, there's a trust fund he'd like to establish for the child." Sarah felt a wave of conflicting emotions, relief that there was some practical solution, indignation that he thought money alone could fix everything, and a flicker of hope. "What about us?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Our marriage?" William gazed at her, eyes clouded. "I want to help you. And our child. I know I can't change the past, but I can at least do right by you now." He hesitated, swallowing hard. "As for us, Sarah, I can't pretend I haven't caused terrible damage. I don't expect you to forgive me instantly." But maybe with time, she wasn't sure how to respond. It felt like they were strangers. She realized she was trembling. "He's acknowledging the child," she told herself. That was step 1. Charles laid out documents referencing monthly allowances, coverage for medical bills, etc. The amounts were staggering. Sarah had never seen such figures. She could live comfortably, rent an apartment, and never worry about basic needs again. But guilt gnawed at her. Should she accept this? She eyed William, her voice wavering. "Why now?" she asked. "Why not?" Before William's face was taut, When I saw you disappeared from our condo and heard rumors you were struggling, I tried to locate you, but I was overwhelmed with expansions, new deals, then the pandemic of responsibilities. I kept putting it off. He inhaled, pained. That was wrong. I realized I couldn't move forward, knowing you might be suffering. You deserved better. Damn right I did, Sarah muttered, tears burning her eyes. She glanced at the legal documents. They were a band-aid solution. Maybe it was an answer for the baby. Yet a single question lingered. Could William Donovan possibly be part of my life again? She didn't sign anything that day, telling Charles she needed time to think. William offered to call her a car, but she declined, wanting to walk back to the shelter to clear her head. He handed her a card with his personal cell number, the only item that felt remotely intimate. She left the grand building uncertain whether she was stepping toward salvation or heartbreak. That evening, Sarah returned to the shelter in a daze. She found Rebecca in the kitchen, dishing out bowls of soup to the residents. Feeling the weight of the day pressing down on her, Sarah pulled Rebecca aside and recounted the surreal encounter with William Donovan. She showed her the paperwork, baffling sums of money that could turn her life around. That's... wow, Rebecca breathed, flipping through the pages. I've never seen so many zeros on a support agreement. She paused. So what are you going to do? Sarah sighed, sinking into a chair. I don't know. Part of me feels like taking this money is the only logical choice. The baby deserves a stable life, not a mother stuck in a shelter. But another part, she rubbed her belly. I'm scared he's just trying to buy off his conscience. If I sign, do I lose my dignity? Rebecca placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. It's not about dignity, Sarah. It's about providing for your child and yourself. You've sacrificed so much. You deserve some security. That doesn't mean you have to let him back in your life unless you want to. Those words calmed Sarah slightly, but her mind remained unsettled. She recalled her once blazing love with William, how they'd giggle over cheap pizza late at night, how she'd fallen asleep on his shoulder while he read his code aloud. Is that man still in there, beneath the polished millionaire facade, she wondered. A part of her yearned for closure or even a chance at reconciliation. But the hurt was fresh, the betrayal still raw. The baby's well-being, however, was paramount. That same night, she carefully reviewed the documents, scribbling notes and questions in the margins, wanting to ensure she wasn't signing away any rights inadvertently. If William was sincere in his remorse, maybe she could start by accepting financial support, then see if anything else could be salvaged later. She set the papers aside, resolved to meet with Charles again in a few days. Meanwhile, Sarah's new part-time receptionist job started. She commuted by bus, then hopped the subway to a modest building in Midtown, stepping into the small publishing house. The environment was busy, yet casual stacks of manuscripts, coffee mugs on every desk, editors arguing about grammar. On her first day, she answered phones, directed visitors, and fetched coffee for staff meetings. By lunchtime, she was exhausted, but a gentle wave of triumph swelled inside her. I'm working. I'm making strides. During a brief break, she scrolled her phone and saw a new message from William. Please let me know if you have any questions about the agreement. Also, I hope you're doing well. That was all. So formal, yet tinged with a cautious warmth. Sarah stared at the screen, unsure how to reply, eventually typing a short, I'm still thinking. I'm safe. Thanks. She pressed send. Her heart hammered, but she forced herself to focus on her tasks. Over the following week, she gradually came to a decision. She agreed to sign the financial support arrangement, but made it clear to Charles Whitmore in an email that she didn't want William controlling her life. She insisted on having her own apartment in her own name, a modest but comfortable place near the shelter, so she could remain in the supportive environment until she felt truly stable. She also wanted the freedom to make medical and personal decisions for the baby. If William truly wanted to be involved, they could discuss visitation and co-parenting later. To her astonishment, William agreed to all of it, no arguments. He forwarded a preliminary lease for a small 2-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, the rent fully paid for a year. Sarah felt a surge of relief. He's taking responsibility, she thought. Maybe there was a shred of the old William left. But was she ready for more than just a transactional arrangement? Late one night, cradling the phone, she impulsively dialed his personal number. He picked up immediately, sounding anxious. "Sarah." She swallowed. "I just wanted to say thank you," she managed, "for the help." Silence filled the line, then a soft exhale. "Of course. It's the least I can do." Her voice trembled. This baby, William, it's ours. He or she deserves 2 parents who at least respect each other." He murmured, "I'd like that. I'd like to earn your respect again. And maybe one day, your forgiveness." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She remembered how once, years ago, they could share entire nights, simply talking, dreaming. She had so many questions for him: why he abandoned her, what truly motivated his success, whether there was any love left. But for now, she whispered, "Good night, William," and ended the call. By the time Sarah was entering her 7th month of pregnancy, her life looked drastically different. With William's financial support, she moved into the small but cozy apartment. The walls were painted a cheerful cream color, and there was an extra room she planned to turn into a nursery. The furniture was minimal, just a sofa, a bed, and a kitchen table. But it was hers. Her name was on the lease. Her job at the publishing house had also become slightly more secure. The manager recognized her punctuality and diligence. They offered her an extended contract for another 3 months. With the baby coming, Sarah wasn't sure how long she could keep working, but at least she had some sense of purpose each day. She'd found a routine that made her feel human again. Wake up, check on emails, go to work, come home. Set aside half an hour to jot down story ideas and then rest. She still visited the shelter occasionally, volunteering to help with new arrivals, offering them a spark of hope in the same way Rebecca had done for her. One chilly afternoon, Sarah heard a knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find William standing there, holding a small bouquet of lilies and a bag of groceries. Her heart pounded as she took in his hesitant smile. "I was in the neighborhood," he explained. "Thought I'd stop by, if that's okay." Sarah hesitated. She hadn't told him her exact address. Charles must have. She had been careful with boundaries, not wanting to feel controlled. But she found herself nodding, stepping aside to let him in. He handed her the flowers, which she placed in a vase on the kitchen table. "I brought some things," he said, lifting the grocery bag. "Fresh fruit, vitamins, and a new jacket for you. The weather's getting colder." The gesture caught her off guard. "Thank you," she managed, smoothing her hand over her growing belly. His eyes flicked to the apartment, taking in the bare walls and modest furnishings. "It's nice, cozy," he remarked, trying to fill the silence. He glanced at her abdomen again, then back at her face. "May I ask, do you know the baby's gender?" She shook her head. "I want it to be a surprise," she said softly. "That's Wonderful. William looked down, fiddling with the bag. Finally, he exhaled. Sarah, I know showing up like this might be too forward. I'm trying to respect your space, but I'd also like to be more involved. I want to help with the doctor appointments, the nursery. Anything you need. She studied him, noticing a sincerity in his gaze that hadn't been there during their last tumultuous months together. Why the sudden change, she asked. She recalled the humiliating nights she spent on the streets, clinging to her coat for warmth, while he mingled with venture capitalists. William's shoulders sagged. When I left, I was consumed by my ambition, believing I couldn't handle a relationship. I was terrified of failing. I did fail you in the worst way. Then once success arrived, I felt emptier than ever. All I had was money, status, and a hollow sense of accomplishment. He paused, voice raw. I realize now that none of it matters, without love, without people who truly care about you. I guess I'm trying to atone for that. I can't change the past, but I can try to be here now. Tears prickled Sarah's eyes. The sincerity in his voice shook her. I appreciate the honesty, she said slowly. She wondered if it was real or if guilt simply propelled him now that she was visibly pregnant and vulnerable. Yet a part of her, the part that remembered how they'd once dreamed side by side, wanted to believe him. Would you like some tea? She offered, gesturing to the kettle on the stove. He nodded gratefully. The two of them settled at the tiny kitchen table, sipping tea amidst the silence. The city traffic hummed outside. Neither knew how to pick up the pieces of a shattered marriage in one afternoon, but at least they were there, trying. After a while, William cleared his throat. I'd like to take you to your next prenatal appointment, he said. If you'll let me. I can drive or we can get a car. Whatever you prefer. She hesitated only briefly before nodding. That would be nice. Deep down, a small flicker of warmth lit her heart, something akin to hope. William accompanied Sarah to her next prenatal appointment at Bellevue Hospital. Ms. Francis, the shelter nurse who volunteered there, greeted them warmly, but Sarah noticed the curious glances from staff members. She imagined they recognized William. His face was plastered across business headlines. Yet to his credit, he didn't flaunt his status. He simply held Sarah's coat while she changed into a gown and asked the doctor thoughtful questions about the baby's development. They heard the baby's heartbeat again, steady and reassuring. William's expression softened, and Sarah saw tears in his eyes. A powerful wave of emotion struck her. It was the first tangible moment she realized he truly cared about the child. On their way out, he placed a gentle hand on her back, guiding her through the bustling hallway. She allowed the small gesture, longing for closeness, yet keeping her guard up. In the hospital lobby, they unexpectedly bumped into a familiar face, Barbara Donovan Williams' mother. Her short silver hair was styled elegantly, and she wore a designer coat. She froze upon spotting her son with Sarah. William, she exclaimed. Then her gaze flicked to Sarah's round belly, and her eyes narrowed. I heard rumors, but I thought you two were done. Sarah instinctively braced herself. She recalled the tension with her mother-in-law, who never quite warmed to her. Barbara had always found subtle ways to criticize Sarah's family background and modest means. She also blamed Sarah for distracting William from more important ambitions. William squared his shoulders. Mother, this is Sarah. My wife, she's pregnant with our child. Barbara's lips pressed into a thin line. So you're reconciling? She asked, voice laced with disapproval. Sarah couldn't hold back. I wouldn't call it that, she said quietly. "We're trying to figure things out, at least for the baby's sake." Barbara sniffed disdainfully. "William, you have far too many responsibilities to let old mistakes drag you down." She eyed Sarah as if she were an intruder. "Why didn't you tell him you were pregnant sooner?" A flame of anger rose in Sarah. "I tried. He left, and I had no way to reach him. And trust me, I wouldn't call carrying your grandchild a mistake." William gently took his mother's arm. "Enough, Mother. The baby is my responsibility, and I won't have you speak to Sarah that way. We're not discussing this here in a hospital lobby." Barbara sniffed again. "We'll talk later, William." She glared at Sarah with thinly veiled contempt, then turned on her heel and walked away. Heart-pounding, Sarah noticed people staring. She blinked back, tears, humiliated by the confrontation. William's jaw was tight. "I'm sorry. She had no right to talk to you like that," he said softly. But Sarah's mind raced. She recalled how Barbara had once told her she wasn't good enough for William, that he needed a partner more on his level. Now wealthy and successful, William's family clearly saw Sarah as an obstacle. "It's fine," she muttered, though her trembling hands said otherwise. "I'll manage." They walked outside, the crisp air hitting their faces. William turned to her. "Please don't let her get to you. She doesn't speak for me." Sarah found her resolve. "I won't. But if we're going to co-parent, I need to know you'll stand by me, not be swayed by your mother's opinions." He nodded, eyes earnest. "I promise." Though his promise felt genuine, Sarah couldn't ignore the chill left by the confrontation. She remembered the nights when William's mother belittled her for dreaming of being a writer, for lacking financial security. Would that negativity poison their child's life too? Or had William grown enough to shield his new family from it? Only time would tell. On the drive back to Sarah's apartment, the tension was palpable. William tried to make small talk about the baby's due date, about nursery decor, but Sarah was lost in her thoughts. In a rare moment of vulnerability, he admitted quietly, "My mother was always controlling. Part of why I left was because I felt suffocated by her expectations, by the pressure of success. I let that overshadow you and me. I'm sorry." Sarah clutched her seatbelt. "What's done is done," she said, voice steady. "Let's just focus on the future, on doing right by this baby. That's all that matters." Inside, though, her emotions churned. Could we really have a future together, she wondered? Or is it just going to be co-parenting with a man I once loved? At her apartment, he walked her to the door. "Call me if you need anything," he said softly. She nodded, uncertain if she'd ever be ready to let him fully back into her life. The final weeks of Sarah's pregnancy arrived with a swirl of conflicting emotions. Her belly felt enormous, every movement an effort. Sleep eluded her, replaced by a blend of excitement and anxiety about the impending birth. William visited regularly, bringing supplies, maternity clothes, organic food, baby items. They spoke about practicalities, pediatricians' childcare options, possible names. Yet the question of their relationship remained unresolved. At times, they fell into an unexpected closeness, sharing a laugh at a tiny onesie with silly prints reminiscing about their college days. In those moments, Sarah glimpsed the man she fell in love with, his eyes warm and tender. But the memory of abandonment always lurked. She couldn't easily forget sleeping on sidewalks, shivering in the winter cold, all while he soared to stardom. Trust would not be rebuilt overnight. One evening she typed away at a short story, her old passion for writing rekindling, when a gentle knock came at the door. She opened it to find William in casual clothes holding a large container of homemade soup. "You mentioned in passing that you craved chicken soup," he said, smiling sheepishly. "I asked my personal chef to make a batch." "Don't worry, I didn't cook it myself. That would be disastrous." Sarah's laughter slipped out before she could stop it. "Thank you. That's thoughtful." He set the container down, noticing her manuscript drafts scattered across the table. "Are you writing again?" She blushed, nodding. "Just trying to get the creative juices flowing. Something for me, you know, to find myself again." He asked if he could read a snippet. She hesitated, then allowed him. He read quietly, eyes darting across the page. When he finished, he looked up, an admiring expression on his face. "This is really good," he said softly. "I forgot how talented you are." She swallowed, her heart fluttering. He was praising her, not dismissing her efforts as frivolous, like he once had. "Thank you," she whispered. They talked about the story about a lone traveler who finds hope in unexpected places. The conversation flowed naturally, reminiscent of their younger selves. At one point, he gently placed a hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick. A shared smile passed between them, something both tender and uncertain. Later that night, as he left, she lingered at the door. "William," she said softly, "I just want you to know. I see you trying. I appreciate it." He exhaled, relief washing over his face. "I'll keep trying, Sarah." But the next day, chaos returned. William called her in a panic, asking her to watch the news. Another business scandal had broken out, accusations that Donovan Enterprises engaged in questionable stock trading. Rumors swirled that William's mother, Barbara, had been pulling strings behind the scenes, orchestrating backdoor deals. William's name was splashed across headlines with tabloids, speculating about the moral integrity of his entire operation. Sarah flipped on her old TV set, seeing reporters swarm in front of Donovan Enterprises. A few sensationalist channels displayed a picture of Sarah from months ago, claiming she was the estranged wife carrying the heir to a troubled empire. She felt nauseous. Was she about to be dragged into the public eye? William texted, "I'm sorry. This is out of control. I never wanted you to be involved." She fought the urge to panic, but the stress weighed heavily, and within hours, mild contractions started. She was only 36 weeks along, a bit early, but still within a safe range. The contractions weren't severe yet, but she felt them enough to know her body might be preparing for labor. She called Miss Francis, who advised her to rest and hydrate, warning her to come to the hospital if things intensified. Night descended, and the tabloids kept spewing stories. A photo of Barbara, stern-faced, refused to speak to reporters. They insinuated that William's entire fortune could be at risk. Sarah tried not to care about money, but she worried about the baby. If Donovan Enterprises collapsed under scandal, would her child be caught in the crossfire of a messy public fiasco? When William arrived at her apartment, he looked drained, like he hadn't slept in days. "I'm sorry for the media circus," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I had no idea my mother was involved in shady trades. I've fired the people responsible, but the damage is done." Sarah tried to remain calm, but the Braxton Hicks contractions flared, causing her to wince. William noticed immediately fear flashing across his features. "Are you okay? I think—" She paused, breathing through the discomfort. "I might be in early labor." His face paled, and in that moment, all talk of scandal and business melted away. "Let's get you to the hospital," he said gently, helping her gather her things. As they hurried out, Sarah realized a new chapter was beginning. Whatever storms raged outside, she was about to bring a child into the world, and she needed William's unwavering support. Inside the maternity wing at Bellevue Hospital, time seemed to slip into a blur of fluorescent lights, medical chatter, and waves of pain. Sarah was admitted with mild contractions that by midnight turned fierce. William stayed by her side, gripping her hand through each surge. Sweating and trembling, Sarah alternated between tears and focused breathing, clinging to the promise that soon she'd hold her baby. It was a tumultuous night. At one point, the baby's heart rate dipped slightly, prompting quick action from the medical staff. Fear stabbed through Sarah. She locked eyes with William, seeing raw terror reflected there. In that moment, all bitterness faded, replaced by the realization that they both desperately wanted their child to be safe. The baby's heartbeat stabilized, and relief flowed. Hours crawled by. Finally, near dawn, Sarah felt the overwhelming urge to push. Nurses coached her, encouraging her to bear down. She felt like every muscle in her body was on fire. William murmured supportive words, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. With a final guttural cry, she felt the release of pain and the sudden miraculous wail of new life. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, holding up a tiny, squirming newborn. A rush of emotions seized Sarah. Love, relief, awe. She reached out trembling arms as they placed the baby on her chest. Shocked by the warmth of that tiny body, tears streamed down Sarah's face. William's eyes glistened too, a rare vulnerability she'd never seen in him before. "Welcome to the world," Sarah whispered, voice choked, pressing a kiss to the baby's wet forehead. The little girl quieted, opening her eyes for a brief second, as if trying to focus on her mother's face. Later they moved Sarah to a recovery room. William remained close, pacing the hallway, on calls to his legal team, but always returning to check on Sarah and the baby. He smiled whenever he saw them together, as though the world outside, with all its scandal and drama, had lost its power here. Barbara tried to visit, but Sarah requested only William and the medical staff be allowed in. She wasn't ready to confront her mother-in-law. Not yet. Meanwhile, word arrived that the scandal at Donovan Enterprises was being resolved. William had stepped forward, taking responsibility for corporate oversight lapses and cooperating with regulators. He was determined to repair the damage rather than hide. 2 days passed in the hospital, a whirlwind of feeding diaper changes and exhausted naps. Sarah watched William hold their daughter, marveling at how gently he cradled her. They hadn't formally picked a name. Sarah had 6 favorites. While gazing into her daughter's round, curious eyes, she decided on Hope. It felt fitting. This tiny baby was the embodiment of new beginnings. When discharge day came, William insisted on driving them to Sarah's apartment. He carefully carried the car seat, setting it up by the living room couch. Sarah gently unbuckled Hope, lifting her close. For a moment, they stood together in the quiet apartment, the hush broken only by soft baby sighs. "I want to make a pledge," William said, voice low. "To be here for you and Hope, always. I know I can't erase the past, but I swear I'll do everything in my power to make our future better." Sarah gazed at him, then at Hope. Her heart brimmed with a kaleidoscope of emotions: uncertainty, gratitude, a cautious desire to heal. "It won't be easy," she murmured. "We have a lot to work through, but I'd like to try." He exhaled relief, flooding his features. "We'll go at your pace. Whatever you need." She nodded, tears glimmering. Over his shoulder, she saw a reflection in the window herself, William and Hope in his arms forming a fragile family portrait. Perhaps fate had brought them full circle. The child they created now bound them with a love that neither betrayal nor success could sever. For weeks they navigated those uncharted waters. William balanced corporate responsibilities with fatherhood, often losing track of time as he admired his sleeping daughter. Sarah slowly let her guard down, recognizing that while forgiveness would be a journey, she didn't have to walk it alone anymore. Each day, she felt stronger. Each day, baby Hope grew a reminder that life could emerge triumphant, even from heartbreak. Whether or not Sarah and William's relationship would fully mend remained to be seen. But for the first time, she believed in second chances. In a world as unpredictable as theirs, one truth shone clear. Love, when nurtured, can heal even the deepest wounds. And so from the frigid sidewalks of homelessness to the gentle warmth of a newfound family, Sarah and William's story shows that life rarely unfolds as expected, but hope can spark miracles. Their journey reminds us that every hardship carries the seed of possibility, and every broken bond can mend with genuine remorse, forgiveness, and perseverance. Thank you for joining me in this emotional roller coaster of heartache, redemption, and rebirth. If this story moved you, if you felt Sarah's struggles and found inspiration in her resilience, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support ensures we can continue creating dramatic, heartfelt stories that spark conversations and spread hope. Comment below. What part of Sarah and William's journey resonated with you the most? Share your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation going. Together we celebrate love's power to heal no matter how broken the path once seemed.